Hello from London, everyone. I'm Francois, and today I'm going to be talking to you about art meets science and tackling data and perceptions. So the core of the work I'm presenting today is about a joint model of artificial and human intelligence. In particular, it's used in healthcare. So I'll start with a provocative and contentious statement, which is to say that it is not obvious a priori that humans should still play a role in healthcare, given the advent of powerful artificial intelligence systems. So we can think about it that way. Performance of models and algorithms are sort of increasing across the board. And that means, for example, that AI algorithms tend to classify images better than specialists, that breast cancer diagnosis, for example, can be performed better and faster by an algorithm, and that chatbots can answer questions at any time. In other words, they are scalable. So once they've got the knowledge, you can use an infinity of chatbots. This paves the way to really cool new synergies between bioengineering and AI, robots and AI. So we could think of all sorts of personalized treatment, personalized robots to take care of people, especially during a pandemic like COVID, where there are issues around human-to-human contact. However, there is a massive but, and this is where human intelligence comes back in. First of all, let us note that there is subhuman performance of certain algorithms. So when we say that AI algorithms are improving, this is certainly true, but it's not completely true 100%. So there are still pockets of knowledge where human knowledge actually still outperforms algorithms. And there's particularly quite a few when knowledge becomes complex and across tasks. More importantly, perhaps, there are issues around productionization of ML algorithms. What I mean by this is to say that there are lots of proofs of concept that show generally extremely interesting and promising results. That doesn't, however, mean that they're going to translate into something that can be used on a day-to-day basis in a hospital or by a general practitioner. So this is sort of the first type of argument. The second type of argument has to do with data. First of all, in lots of applications, there is just not enough data, and there is a lack of data for certain very particular diseases, for example, right? So some rare conditions are not going to have near enough data to be able to provide a great algorithm that's going to be able to outperform. So there are lots of conditions we already know we're simply not going to have the data to be able to build a state-of-the-art sort of ML or AI algorithm. There can be biases or limitations in data sets. This has been revealed to be true in lots of situations. For example, again, around COVID vaccine, where we have seen that some vaccine panels were not as representative of the population of a country as they could be, that some minorities, so the so-called BAMI in the UK, were actually not as well represented than, let's say, majority groups in those vaccine panels. And what that means is that there are limitations to what you can learn from a data set that's not necessarily representative. And last but not least, on the topic of data, there can be rare events that cause certain conditions or rare connections that can be made. And this is typically very hard for an algorithm to detect. So in particular, if you're talking about certain side effects or certain reactions, let's say, again, to a vaccine, you may want to draw on your previous experience or past experience of vaccines rather than just looking at the data you're getting from a panel. Again, that means you would know, for example, that certain vaccines can lead to an anaphylactic shock. And so you would know that from domain expertise. That would not necessarily show up in a small sample. Last but not least, let's talk a bit about how humans can integrate the loop with algorithms. So the first one is the traditional way things are set up is to have a human in the loop. Typically, for instance, if you think of a radiologist actually examining results at the end of an algorithm and sort of like taking those outputs, looking at them, and just checking that they make sense. The second is domain expertise, which is to say that in mathematical terms, we can think of this as saying that specialists have some priors in terms of how they look at patients or conditions. They're informed by all the learning that they've already gone through. Transfer learning is another example where actually humans tend to still outperform algorithms, which is to say, having seen certain conditions or having seen something which is somehow similar to a new patient you're seeing, for instance, and you're actually going to be able to transfer the knowledge you had in a different situation to a new situation. And that is still something that humans are very good at. And last but not least, the aspect of communication and empathy, which are so important, and it's been shown that in healthcare, for instance, again, in the course of the recent pandemic, that the emphasis on human empathy was extremely important in treatment of the COVID condition, for example. So let's now move on to our approach and what we've been trying to do. So in a nutshell, what we're trying to do is make the best of both worlds. And so we're trying to take both the human intelligence and the artificial intelligence. And interestingly, this comes from a mix of very old and fairly new insights. So old because it ties back to a stream of literature from the 1990s on so-called mixture of experts, or MOEs. So this was a fairly rich literature at the time. And in a nutshell, it's based on having multiple networks which are independent, right? Which are learning from the same data, but they're just sort of distributed, if you want. But then we've got gates, and they serve as bottlenecks. What I mean by that is they're actually going to take the outputs of the different networks, they're going to combine them, and then they're going to move on to the next gate. And so this kind of phenomenon was extremely useful, and each network was called an expert. So in a nutshell, this has to do a lot with distribution, federated learning, collaborative learning, which have been quite hot topics recently. There are slight differences, but the core of the approach is both parallelization and then recombination. And so last but not least, obviously, human learning has been shown to be quite close to Bayesian learning. So there are behavioral biases in the way we acquire knowledge. However, it's been shown to be fairly adequate in terms of modeling of the way we work. So in a nutshell, why should experts only be models? So why couldn't the experts in our overall model also be humans? And so this is what we propose. So this is a bit of a busy slide, but this is trying to show exactly what we're doing. On the one hand, we've got experts, which we've called expert 1 to expert P, which are on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, we've got models. So let's say model 1 to model Q. And so the idea is that we're actually going to try and mix those two things. So experts can come in because we're going to give them a prior distribution, which is, again, in Bayesian speak, which is the way we would encode the knowledge that they're coming from without having seen the data. Similarly, models are going to be defined in a certain class, and they're all going to have certain parameters that encode the model. If you think of a logistic regression, that would be just one vector of weights. If you think of a neural network, it would be a matrix of weights, so on and so forth. What's really important here is to say that the experts can be very dissimilar. They may have a prior distribution on different tasks or different things. So experts do not need to know everything. They can just be very good at certain things. Similarly, for models, those models can be different. Right, so you could have, just for the sake of example, you could have an RNN model, you could have a CNN model, and then you could try and combine those. So they can be fairly different. They can, in the spirit of collaborative learning, they can even be the same model, but with slightly different hyperparameters, as slightly different number of layers or slightly different number of weights in a particular layer. So once we've got those experts, those P experts and those Q models, what we then do is we've got one additional layer, which is going to combine basically the outputs of those individual networks or experts. And based on those weights, we're then going to generate a prediction. So a good example would be, for instance, if we look at trying to predict whether there is or not a tumor in a certain image, right, that's been taken, let's say an X-ray or a scan, and we're trying to determine whether we can spot something that looks like a tumor. We could have different networks, we could have different experts that are going to try and generate a prediction, and then we're going to combine those. And finally, and this is what we've indicated towards the bottom of the slide, there are updates, and this is what we call the learning, which is once we start being confronted with the data, we start actually seeing real data. So the model's been fit, and now it's sort of live. The question is, how would we want to update our system? And so I will argue that the first bit is fairly simple, which is the first layer is weights. And so just reweighing the model is fairly trivial, it's fairly easy. So that's been done for a long time. And so this can be done Bayesian style, whereby we have a certain prior on the weights, and we simply reweigh as time goes by. And so typically what would tend to happen is that the experts that have got, that are closer to the truth or who make less mistakes, we tend to have a higher weight. But then things that can be a bit less obvious. So model parameters can also be updated. So if you go back to a previous slide, that means literally that all those thetas around here can also be updated. Again, this is in keeping with the literature on expert. But the last one, which is quite interesting, is to say that the prior distributions can themselves learn. So experts should be able to, if you want, learn from the data they're seeing, from the new information they're seeing, and that means moving towards Bayesian learning themselves. So let us note here to pause and say this is actually quite difficult to do, and this is a very vibrant area of research to try and figure out how to be able to actually have at the same time learning from machines and learning from humans. And this is quite difficult to do because typically those things learn at different rates, different pace. There are also all sorts of biases in the way humans could learn, tend to be a bit of a cliff edge effect in some predictions, for instance. And so what's quite difficult is to be able to manage those two at the same time. So that's an area of research. So here we go, we present the actual mathematical or statistical setup of what we've done. Please look at the paper for details on this, as well as for all the references. So in a nutshell, we consider a number of categories of patients. So we've called those C. As before, we've got P experts. And so what we're going to do here is that we're going to consider tolerance to a treatment or success of a treatment. I like the notion of tolerance, and so we're going to model that as is done usually by a latent model. So the idea is that the success of the treatment, or the tolerance of the treatment, happens if a latent variable, which we call S, which is specific to each patient or each individual, is actually above a certain threshold, which we call tau. So this could be seen as, concentration of antibodies above a certain level, concentration of certain cells above a certain level, and this would come from a biological mechanism that would make sense in that particular situation. And so the idea here is that if you want the latent variable, again, S, is driven by a mean, which is unknown, right? So this is what we've written here, which is SIOC is equal to mu C plus sigma C epsilon I. And the idea here is that we don't know what that mu C is. Similarly, we don't know what the threshold is, but this is a lot less important. What really matters is that we've got different categories, and each category is encoded, again, by a mean, mu C. And so each expert actually is going to give a prior on that particular mu. So each expert, again, whether that can be a model, which comes up with an output, and the output is the prediction of that mu, or it can be, if you want, a doctor, it can be a physician, it can be a researcher who's actually come up with those values. Again, those values could themselves come from having explored prior data, et cetera, right? So it's a fairly flexible approach. Each expert is given an initial weight that we call gamma J. This would typically be a uniform weight. So if there are two experts, that would typically be 1/2 at the very beginning. And as we learn, those weights again would change. So let's look at some results. So we've done this in a very, very simple case where we've got one category of patients and we only have two experts. So the idea is that a first expert, let's call him or her, expert A predicts -1, and the expert B predicts +1. So again, this is the underlying propensity, and this is the mean of that propensity, right? And the initial weight is gamma 1/2. So again, we just put a uniform weight on the true experts. We're agnostic. We do not know. Now, suppose that we had started with no patients at all. So we had just encoded prior knowledge, and now we've got 100 patients in total, and we can see that so this is a parameter that we're going to vary. A of those patients are actually tolerant, right? Which means that the tolerance rate we could define as A over X. So it's just a percentage. And so this is what we can see on this plot, which is on the X-axis, we've actually represented that tolerance rate. And so we've made it vary. And what you can see, for instance, is that if you have a tolerance rate, which is slightly above 50%, right, around 50%, you would see that the weight that is given to each expert remains about 50%. So what that means is that barring a few non-linearities in the model, but the idea here is to say we haven't really learned anything, and we seem to be a bit in between. So it would make sense to actually allocate, even after seeing the data, a fairly similar weight to both experts. What we see, however, is that if the proportion, for instance, of success is about 90%, then we would expect the weight that you can see on the y-axis on the first expert to be very low, because that means that the value of -1 is fairly improbable. So the idea here is that it's a very, very simple framework. It's a very simple application of the model we've built to depict the learning that can happen. This is typically how you would fit the parameters in that model. So just to conclude, what we've tried to show is a fairly simple application of a much broader model of a joint sort of human artificial intelligence, a lot of active research around how to structure those. For reasons that we've explained, which can be both sort of philosophical reasons, but also very practical reasons, we need both forms of intelligence, particularly in healthcare. And there are lots of extensions to this framework. So the key question really remains how to learn for humans in a framework where you also have models that are learning. And so how you would combine those two things and how you find the right rhythm to make those two things happen. So that's it for me. I hope you've enjoyed it. And if you have any questions, please let me know.